My name is Greta Green. I'm 72 years old, and I still live in the small house on the outskirts of the city where I grew up. All these years since I left my job at the school, I've been trying to stay afloat. I didn't break, though it was hard. The support I once gave my family eventually turned against me. My children, Robert and Emily, left the house long ago, each carving their own path. Robert, the older one, has always been a high flyer, a successful businessman, always looking for profit in every move he makes. And then there's Emily. Emily, my sweet girl, was always closer to me, reaching out less for help. She now works in the medical field, quite successful, but I know deep down she's no longer interested in what I'm doing. Each of my children held a place in my heart, but now something has changed. They no longer seek my support, or maybe I'm just not interesting to them anymore. Even when I helped them financially when their businesses were starting out, there was never any thank you. But I held on. I didn't have the wealth that many others chased after. I had my small joys, a garden in the backyard, a bookstore in the nearby neighborhood, and a few good friends. Seemed like a quiet life. But one day, just after I had sold some old stocks that brought in a significant amount of money, everything changed. That morning I was sitting in my kitchen sipping coffee, going through the bills when suddenly my phone rang. It was Robert. I could immediately tell from his voice that it wasn't just a casual call. He asked if I could meet him and Emily. "Mom, it's important," he said. And I agreed. No suspicions, though I had heard whispers of something significant needing to be settled that day. I walked to the cafe where we had agreed to meet. They were already sitting at a corner table, and I noticed how their eyes were cold, controlled. Robert looked at me carefully and said, "Mom, we need your help." He had a lot to say but little substance. As usual, he rambled on about expanding his business, about investment opportunities that required a great deal of money. Instead of giving me a clear proposal, he spoke in broad terms about possibilities that may or may not bring profit, but still required financial backing. His tone grew harsher, and I realized what he really wanted. He needed money. "Mom, this is a big project and we'd really appreciate it if you could help," he said. I sat back in my chair, as always, listening, but this time I didn't rush to agree. It was important to me now, more than ever, to understand that I was no longer the gullible old woman they could manipulate. I looked at them and couldn't stay silent anymore. All these years they had forgotten about me, only to come to me when it suited them. But now I couldn't let this slide. My support had never been without its cost, and I had my own rules, and I would stick to them. They had forgotten that. "Listen, Robert," I said, and his eyes immediately shifted, watching me closely. "I'm not going to help you." His face turned to shock, but I didn't back down. "All these years I've seen how you've treated me. I'm sorry, but I'm not supporting this anymore." I knew everything had shifted in that moment. It was no longer about me blindly giving them everything I had for nothing in return. They would have to find their own way. Robert opened his mouth to say something, but the words didn't come out. He looked at Emily, but she stayed silent. She didn't speak, didn't defend him. There was nothing they could say now. I had finally set a boundary, and there was no turning back. "I've given you so much," I continued. "But that's over. I'm done." Robert's expression was one of disbelief, but I couldn't feel sorry for him. Not anymore. I stood up and walked toward the door, not looking back. I had given them everything, my time, my money, my love. And this was how they had repaid me. But now I was taking it all back. I didn't know exactly what I'd do next, but I would never let them manipulate me again. It was time for me to take control. I went home that evening, a strange, freeing feeling swelling inside me. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I had taken the reins of my own life. Maybe this was the start of something new, a turning point. My hands were trembling, but I wasn't scared. I was alive. ChatGPT. A few minutes passed as I sat at the cafe table, staring at Robert and Emily, who sat silently, waiting for my words. The air between us thickened. I wasn't in a rush. My mind was already working, crafting a plan that didn't include their manipulations. Robert tried to break the silence, but I didn't give him the chance. "I don't have that kind of money, Robert. And I have no intention of giving it to you," I said firmly, meeting his gaze. "All these years, when you came to me only to squeeze out more, I saw it. And now that I know I have money you can't even imagine, you think I'm going to finance your projects." Robert furrowed his brows. He thought I was just an old woman who didn't understand the way business worked. And Emily, who had always been the more delicate one, immediately became upset. Mom, you don't get it. This is a chance for us, for you. You don't want us to grow and succeed, do you? She said, her voice rising in both volume and aggression. For all these years, she had always been the one to convince me that they were the true success stories, and I was the one left behind in my little old house, struggling to keep up with time. But now I realized she was the one who had been using me all along. My help has never been without cost, Emily. I don't want to be just another stepping stone for your success, I said, my anger barely contained. Robert looked at me as though I had just slapped him. He hadn't expected me to react this way. I wasn't just his old mother anymore, the one he could count on for another check to fund his latest business idea. I set my coffee cup down quietly and added, I'm not going to be part of this anymore. I will do what I think is necessary, but you won't control my life any longer. They sat there whispering to each other. I didn't understand why I felt such certainty, but in that moment I knew. I no longer needed their approval. I stood up and walked towards the door. Behind me there was only confusion in their eyes, but I knew this was how it had to be. I walked home, my thoughts becoming clearer with every step. Not only had I realized I would no longer finance their schemes, but I also understood that it was time to change everything. I couldn't just sit and wait for my life to be decided by someone else. I couldn't allow my children to continue thinking they could manipulate me. That same day, I headed to the bank where I had kept my savings for the past few years. But now it wasn't just about saving money. I needed to take control. I met with the financial consultant and began discussing plans for reallocating my assets. I decided to invest some of it into a new venture of my own. That day, I didn't just open a new chapter in my life story. I created a new reality for myself. Robert and Emily had no idea what was coming. I hadn't simply stopped their manipulations. I had no intention of playing the game where I was merely a pawn on their board anymore. This was my game now, my new reality. The very next day I found a location for a small business, one that would change my life. It wasn't a business that would bring in huge profits, but it would be my way to regain my dignity and take back control of my life. When Robert and Emily came to me with their new idea, I was ready. There was no room in my life for their demands anymore. They would find out about it, but not yet. Now I was prepared to say, we're no longer in that place. This was the beginning of a new chapter, and I wasn't about to stay in the back seat any longer. My story was only just beginning. The next few weeks were devoted to completely changing my reality. I opened a small craft shop. Not something big, but something that gave me a sense of satisfaction and the opportunity to create. This was my way of taking back control. To restore what I once had in my hands, when all I had left was my desire to make something of my own, something independent. The shop was in an old neighborhood near the center of town. It was quiet, peaceful, and full of people I knew well. I sold my handmade creations, as well as a few old treasures I found at thrift stores. It was a project for the soul, but also a way to completely free myself from any manipulation by my children. But life didn't wait. It wasn't long before they found me again. Robert and Emily knew that I no longer supported their plans, but their calm didn't last long. They started asking carefully how I was feeling, if I needed help with anything. I realized they were trying to approach me from a different angle. They thought I was still too weak to leave the old things behind. One evening, I received a message from Robert. I opened it on my phone. Mom, we'd like to meet. We need to talk about something important. It's about the future. Normally, I wouldn't have refused. But now I had a different plan. This time, I wasn't just going to agree to everything. I decided I had to stand my ground and stop being the one they could manipulate. We met at a little cafe on the outskirts of town. Robert sat at the same table as before, when I first turned him down for help with his business. This time, he and Emily seemed even more on edge, almost nervously waiting for me to say something different. Mom, we thought you might help us with an important project, Robert began, as though he was picking up the old game again. You know, our company is planning to launch a new business. Without your help, it may not work. It was the same old question, just repackaged. Now I understood they were trying to get me to be a part of their scheme. I couldn't hide my feelings anymore. Robert, Emily, you know I'm not going to help. I've opened my shop. And I know I don't need your money or your projects. I have my dreams now and I will follow them. And they don't include your businesses, I said firmly, making it clear that I was no longer the person I used to be. Emily looked irritated, her lips tightening into a thin line. Mom, you don't understand that this is important not just for us but for you. Without your help, everything will fall apart. You'll be alone again like always and no little shop will fix that. Emily tried again to convince me. You know what I realized, Emily? I asked, looking them both in the eye. I've been alone before, but that didn't matter. What matters now is that I've finally found myself again. And I'm not going to do what I don't want to do anymore. The silence shattered the atmosphere as I stood up and walked toward the door. I didn't wait for their words, didn't turn back. I felt free for the first time in many years. After that meeting, I knew everything had changed. I decided to review my plans again, to create new opportunities for myself and those who truly needed them. I started getting involved in local initiatives, helping women in my neighborhood start their small businesses and develop ideas for the future. I was no longer just a bystander in my own life. The truth was, I had always helped the wrong people. But now I could support others who truly needed help, not those who tried to use me. This new phase became the beginning of restoring not just my business, but also my personal dignity. I wasn't going to let my past define who I was anymore. From now on, every day was a new opportunity. I continued to grow my business and think about how I could help others. And Robert and Emily no longer had any power over my life. Several months passed since I rejected all the usual roles in my family. My life had taken on new momentum. The shop was thriving, and with each passing day, I felt like I was reclaiming a part of what I had once lost. This wasn't just a career shift, it was a transformation in every aspect. In me and my approach to the world, to my family. But just when I thought everything would finally fall into place, they came back. And this time I was ready. It wasn't just another meeting at a cafe. This was a full-blown attack. Robert called again. He was overly polite, almost excessively so. Mom, it's an important matter. We really want to see you. It's about your investments and even more, it concerns your future. Could you come tomorrow? He asked. I immediately sensed something had changed. His tone was different, more anxious, yet still laced with manipulation, hoping to get me to agree. This was the moment I had to put my foot down once and for all. The next day I didn't rush. I chose my favorite dress, put on my favorite shoes and set off to the meeting, but with a different mindset. I knew this conversation would not be the same. I had already taken control of the situation, and this was my big step forward. The meeting took place at a stylish restaurant, one I probably wouldn't have visited before. They sat at a table once again, and though they tried to maintain some distance, I could sense the shift in dynamics. This time I wasn't just reacting. I was in control. Mom, we really need your help. This is an important matter, and we want you to be part of our new project. Without you, we can't move forward, Robert started. He looked more serious than before, less self-assured, perhaps realizing that his usual tactics wouldn't work on me anymore. Emily added, You don't want us to end up in a tough spot again, do you? This is a chance not just for us but for you too. You see how everything is progressing. You could be a part of this. I began to realize that this project was part of a much larger manipulation than I had originally thought. They didn't just come to me for help. I was merely an element that would allow them to achieve greater things and nothing more. You know, I've already made my decision, I said, calmly meeting their gaze. And it won't change. I will not be part of your game anymore. You want me to invest in something I don't believe in. But you know what? I will invest in myself. I placed my coffee cup on the table and watched as their eyes widened. This was the moment when they understood that my answer was final. Mom, you don't understand. Without you, it will all fall apart. Robert tried again. But there were no words left that could change the situation. No, I understand perfectly well. And that's exactly why I will no longer support your ideas. I responded, lifting my head high. I stood up, not waiting for their explanations or demands. They tried to say something, but I was already the confident leader of the situation, and they understood that. I was no longer the old grandmother they could use as their financial crutch. This meeting marked the final goodbye to my past. I returned home with a sense of strength and certainty, as if for the first time in years, I was living for myself. and I knew that it was the right decision. The next day, I focused on finding new partners for my shop. I no longer set limits for myself and decided it was time for a major expansion. My business was no longer just a small project. This was my chance to prove to myself and everyone else that I could succeed on my own. Now, I helped those who truly needed help. My new goal was to support people who wanted to change their lives just as I had. And I no longer needed permission or approval from anyone else. As for Robert and Emily, they no longer had a place in my world. ChatGPT. After the meeting with Robert and Emily, I felt like I had finally reached the point where I no longer depended on how others saw me or how they wanted me to act. My children no longer had the power to manipulate my decisions. I was no longer an object for their plans and demands. The following week, I took my first big step towards my new life. I launched a social initiative for women who wanted to change their lives. It was a program that provided financial support and consulting for those who had ideas but lacked the means to bring them to life. I felt this project was important not just for me, but for those who, like me, once lacked the confidence in their own abilities. What inspired me the most was the fact that I managed to do it without the help of Robert or Emily. Everything I had built was my own achievement, my dedication and hard work. I didn't immediately tell them about the new project. Now that I no longer needed their support, their reactions didn't interest me. But one day I received a message from Emily. It was her usual style. A conversation that began with polite phrases and a pre-planned approach. "Mom, I think we need to talk about what happened. We're really worried about you. You're probably changing everything in your life." Instead of responding right away, I took a moment to look at my notes, review my new ideas, and gather my thoughts. This time I didn't rush. My response was different, more measured. I replied, "Emily, I understand your concern, but I no longer need your approval or help. I've found my path, and now I can help those who need it. My decisions remain mine, and I will continue to do what I believe is right." Her response came almost immediately, and I knew they weren't expecting such an answer. In her message, I could sense an attempt to redirect my attention to their interests again. Although her words were veiled, I had no intention of falling into the trap of old manipulations. Meanwhile, my business was gaining momentum. I began receiving inquiries from women who wanted help. They reached out for support, shared their ideas, and it was a real joy for me. I watched as small businesses began to grow, as people found the courage to start something new, and it was incredible. All these changes gave me a sense of confidence and inner freedom that I hadn't felt in years. I stopped waiting for someone else to come and make decisions for me, for someone to tell me what to do. Now I had the right to choose, and that was the most valuable thing. A few weeks later, I received a call from Robert. His tone was sharp, demanding. He had decided beforehand that now was the time to pressure me. "Mom, how can you act like this? Don't you want to be alone? You need to help us with the new project." I smiled, no longer feeling the emotions that would have once shaken me. I calmly replied, "Robert, I'm not going to be part of your business plans. I am already doing what I believe is right, and I don't want to be the one you can use anymore." The silence on the other end of the phone was almost tangible, and I knew he couldn't believe what he was hearing. I was no longer his financial resource or his backup for business ventures. This was what I had wanted for so long. The final break from everything that had kept me in the past. I was free, and with every new step I took, I felt my freedom becoming more real, and my life truly mine. Now I tasted life in its fullest sense again, without fear, without being tethered to anyone else's plans. All that lay ahead of me were new opportunities. My new project was thriving, and I no longer looked back. They probably still didn't understand, but it no longer mattered. My true power was in learning how to stand on my own 2 feet. Despite having rejected all the usual roles within my family, life continued to throw challenges my way. I truly began to feel how my new decisions were shaping me. The shop brought me joy, but it was only the first step towards something more profound. I wasn't just starting a business. I was beginning a real revolution in my life, to be free and independent of any demands. But just as I started feeling that everything was falling into place, Robert called again. I immediately understood this wasn't just a casual conversation. There was an unfamiliarity in his voice, something more serious than just a family discussion. "Mom, we need to talk about something important." I don't think you quite understand what's going on. This isn't just about money. This is about your future. You have to understand you're not alone," he began, his tone surprisingly soft, even unnervingly kind. I felt the familiar pull of manipulation lurking beneath his words. This wasn't just a conversation about a project. I knew that this was another attempt to drag me back into their web of control. They had seen my refusal as weakness and were certain that, if they found the right approach, they could bring me back into their fold. This time I wasn't planning to compromise. I decided it was time to be as resolute as possible. That same day I met him at a cafe, but I wouldn't allow him to set the terms. I sat down and said directly, "Robert, I'm not the same person I was before. You no longer have the right to decide what matters to me. I have my projects and they have nothing to do with your ideas. I'm no longer willing to fund your businesses or be part of your manipulations." My words took him by surprise. He tried to shift the conversation, talking about the family's future, about the possibilities we could create together. But it all sounded like the same old song. I wasn't falling for it anymore. "I won't let you use me the way you did before. My money is my money and I get to decide how to use it," I said, never breaking eye contact with him. He sat in silence, unsure of how to respond. I could see it in his eyes. He hadn't expected such a response. But I also knew that this was the moment I was no longer part of their world. A feeling of peace washed over me, though I knew this was just the beginning. This moment, standing firm in my decision, not wavering, was the culmination of everything I'd been working towards. I was no longer the victim or the support for others. Now I was the one creating my own reality. But even after my firm rejection, I knew Robert and Emily wouldn't give up so easily. They were determined to find another way to influence me. So I decided to take a step back and reassess my path. Should I truly leave everything as it was, or should I go all the way? I decided to follow my convictions, to do what I believed was right, and to let my new projects grow on my own terms. I would not let any manipulations or demands dictate my choices. Robert and Emily didn't stop trying. They called repeatedly, trying to explain why I should change my stance on their plans. But my decision was final. I was resolute, and this moment became a true test of my strength, a test of whether I could stand by my choices and not give in. Each time they called, each time they tried to pull me back into their world, I stood firm. The calls became less frequent as time passed, but I knew they hadn't entirely given up. But I was different now. I had learned the value of saying no, of standing my ground, and of respecting myself enough to protect my peace. This wasn't just a family issue anymore. This was my life, my independence, and my future. I wasn't going to let anyone tell me how to live, or what I should do with my time, my energy, or my money. It was a grueling journey, not because of external obstacles, but because of the internal struggle to stay true to myself. I had spent so many years bending and giving to others, to my children, my husband, society's expectations. Now I was learning to stand up for what was mine, to claim the space I needed to grow and flourish. My business continued to thrive, and with each passing day, I became more confident in my decisions. The women I was helping through my social initiative, women like me, who once felt like they had nothing, became a source of inspiration. I watched them grow, watched their small businesses take root, and it filled me with joy to know I had contributed to their journeys. It wasn't just about business anymore. It was about community, about empowerment, and about doing what I believed in. And for the first time, I realized I didn't need validation from anyone else. I was enough just as I was. Robert and Emily, on the other hand, never fully understood. They never realized how far I had come, or what it truly meant to be free from their expectations. They still tried to push their agenda, but I was no longer the woman they could manipulate. The more they tried, the stronger I became. And with every step I took, I could feel the weight of the past lifting. I was no longer burdened by guilt or obligation. My choices were mine and I owned them fully. This was the moment when I truly understood my own power. I had been tested by my family, by life, by my own doubts, and I had passed. It wasn't easy, but it was worth it. Every challenge, every obstacle had brought me to this point. Now I was stronger than ever, and nothing could shake the foundation I had built for myself. The test of strength wasn't just about rejecting their demands. It was about embracing my own power, my own voice, and my own path forward. And that was a lesson I would carry with me for the rest of my life. A year had passed, and my life had truly become something entirely different. The shop flourished, and the new project I had launched to support women became a significant part of my existence. I was no longer a shadow in the lives of my children. I no longer allowed them to manipulate my decisions. I had finally understood that true freedom wasn't just the absence of physical barriers. It was the ability to choose my own path and not be held accountable for the expectations of others. I received several collaboration proposals from local organizations that worked with women in business. I began conducting training sessions, helping women with small businesses become independent and gain support to develop their ideas. The feeling that I could change people's lives filled me with new strength. And this path was mine. Alone. I began to realize that all these years when I thought no one heard me or noticed me, I had long been the one who could change everything. I was the catalyst I had been missing. Robert and Emily no longer had that power over me. They couldn't use me anymore. There were no more manipulations, no more demands. I was strong. And when they once again tried to make their offers, I simply ignored them. My decisions were final. This wasn't cruelty. It was my necessity. Not allowing anyone to enter my life with goals that didn't align with mine. And although I understood that my children no longer understood me, I also realized that this had been my best choice. I had no intention of going back and proving my worth to them again. My worth had already been proven by my actions, by my achievements. I felt how this new version of myself, the one that no longer looked back, gradually grew. Every morning, I woke up with a new purpose. I was no longer a victim of circumstances or someone else's plans. I was in charge of my life, and that was more than just freedom. It was a peace I had longed for. In every new day, I found confidence and joy in bringing my ideas to life and helping others. My support now went to those who truly needed it. I was no longer afraid of being used. I was no longer afraid of being abandoned. I knew that I could build my world myself, and it was exactly how I wanted it to be. Although my family didn't understand this, I no longer needed their approval. I was self-sufficient, and that was the truest reflection of me. The year had changed everything. The women I had helped, the businesses I had supported, the lives I had touched. They had all shaped me into a person I could finally respect. I realized that I wasn't simply creating a new version of myself. I was reclaiming the person I had always been. I wasn't just running a shop anymore. I wasn't merely helping others succeed in their businesses. I was building a community, one where each person was supported and encouraged to rise. And in this community, I didn't need anyone to validate my existence. I didn't need my children's approval. I had earned my independence not through their help, but through my own determination. The more I saw the positive impact of my work on the lives of others, the more I believed in the power of my choices. Every step, every decision had led me to this point, and now I saw it all as part of my journey, not just for me but for everyone I helped along the way. Robert and Emily tried to contact me from time to time, but their words no longer had the same effect. They weren't a part of my life anymore, and I didn't need their approval to move forward. I wasn't angry, but I was firm. They were no longer my responsibility. The small business I ran became a symbol of resilience. Every day I worked, I built not just a company, but a life that was truly mine. I no longer lived in the shadow of anyone else's expectations. I was in control, and that control wasn't about power over others, it was about power over my own life. In those quiet moments when I looked out over my shop or watched the women I had mentored grow stronger and more confident in their businesses, I knew I had made the right choice. This was my legacy built on my own terms. The confidence I once lacked now flowed through me with every step I took, every decision I made. The past year had taught me so much. It wasn't just about rejecting others' influence. It was about embracing my own voice, my own vision for my life. And it wasn't just for me. It was for all the women I had helped, for all the people who believed in themselves because I showed them how to believe in their own power. I was no longer the woman who waited for permission, who sought validation from others. I was the woman who created her own path, one decision at a time. And in doing so, I found the peace and joy I had long been searching for. This was the new me, strong, independent, and fully alive in every sense. And I was finally at peace with who I had become.